Protests against the Dina Boluarte administration continue in Peru. In Cusco, violent police repression has left one more civilian dead. In the U.S., a strike of nurses at two major New York hospitals carried on for a third day. And also in France, 8 main worker unions announced National Day of Strikes to protest against the government's planned pension reform. From the headquarters of TeleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, and I'm your anchor, Gladys Quesada. And now we begin with the news. Social unrest continues in Peru as protests against the Boluarte administration spread throughout the country. In Cusco City, demonstrations were once again met with violent police repression, leaving one civilian dead. The Ombudsman's office confirmed the death of an indigenous leader as a result of police repression unleashed against the protesters in the tourist city of Cusco. Remocandia Guevara, who died at the Lorena Hospital, was the leader of a peasant community in the province of Anta. Health officials in Cusco said 16 civilians were injured after protesters tried to take over the city's airport, a gateway to the nearby Incan citadel of Machu Picchu. Protesters and the road blockades against Boluarte and in support of ousted President Pedro Castillo were also seen in 41 provinces, mainly in Peru's south. In total, over 40 citizens have died as a result of the repression unleashed by the army and the police since Dina Boluarte assumed the presidency in December 2022. Also in Peru, social organizations held a tribute to say goodbye to the victims of the massacre at the Juliaca airport. After the events in the city of Puno, the airport will resume its activities in 30 days. On the other hand, social movements denounced the repression of the police forces, which caused about 18 deaths during the protests against the government of Dina Boluarte, in which the citizens demanded a constituent assembly and the liberation of the former president Pedro Castillo at the Juliaca airport. We move on to other topics. In Argentina, the opposition branch in parliament resolved to block this instance until the impeachment process initiated by the executive against the members of the Supreme Court of Justice is halted. The opposition coalition Together for Change rejected the impeachment of the Supreme Court being promoted by the executive and warned the leaders of the ruling party that they will be not able to advance in the project. From the official sector, it is said that the opposing branch intends to paralyze the parliament to prevent the investigation against Horacio Rosati for negotiations and the court rulings. Ecuador's Attorney General's office initiated an investigation into the alleged corruption scheme within public companies, which is allegedly led by relatives of President Guillermo Lasso. The investigation takes a reference as an investigation published by digital media, which reveals an alleged network of corruption led by Danilo Carrera, Guillermo Lasso's brother-in-law. The process seeks to establish responsibilities regarding the links of Lasso's relatives and operations within the National Electricity Corporation. At the same time, the National Assembly convened the president's brother-in-law to clarify the allegations of corruption against him. Social movements in Venezuela expressed their solidarity with the Brazilian people and the president, Luis Ignacio Lula da Silva, after the fascist actions carried out by Bolsonaro supporters. During the rally, the Communal Union and the spokespersons of the Francisco de Miranda Front read a solidarity declaration in support of the Brazilian people and their president. The demonstrators condemned the invasion of the headquarters of the three branches of the government and rejected the violence promoted by groups linked to the former president Jair Bolsonaro. The social movements call on the peoples of the world to denounce the actions of neo-fascist groups that are trying to build a climate of violence in order to twist the will of the Brazilians to live in democracy.
Pues support Lula. Lula was elected by the people. Lula was elected democratically, not appointed. We say no to bureaucracy, no to cronyism. Lula represents the integration of all the peoples of Brazil.
The Venezuelan and Latin American youth and all of us gathered here today support Brazil, because Brazil at this moment is an example of popular dignity, of Latin American dignity too, and obviously we as Bolivarian Revolution defend the dignity of the peoples, the national sovereignties, and we categorically reject the neo-fascist intervention, the imperialist intervention in the free and sovereign peoples of our continent and region.
We want to express our profound gratitude because this solidarity and this immediate response that the people of Brazil, together with the popular and social movements all over the world, are giving us. It is important to say once and for all to fascism, to Bolsonarism, and to all the right wing in Brazil and all over the world that the people will no longer accept to be ignored.
Let's take a short break, but first, remember you can follow us on our TikTok account at TeleSUR English, in which you will be able to see news in different formats, news updates, and more. Other stories coming up, stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. After an interruption of more than 2 years, U.S. money remittance company Western Union has resumed its remittance services to Cuba on a limited basis. Those wishing to send money can only do so from the state of Florida, while recipients can only be customers of Banco Popular de Ahorro, Banco Metropolitano S.A., and Banco de Crédito y Comercio. Money transfers are limited to $2,000 per day, although the goal is to expand operations in the future. The money must be picked up by a person with a Cuban ID card. Western Union suspended its services on the island in 2020 after then U.S. President Donald Trump tightened restrictions imposed by Washington on the Caribbean nation. And the release of the Puerto Rican Ana Belén Montes after more than 20 years in prison in the United States has been trendy in the social networks. She was arrested for allegedly passing intelligence information to Cuba regarding the U.S. plans of aggression against the island. Our correspondent in Havana, Fabiola Lopez, with more details.
Who in the last 60 years has asked the Cuban people if they want the United States to impose a suffocating embargo that makes them suffer? Asked Ana Belén Montes in her first written statements about her arrival in Puerto Rico after serving 21 years in prison for allegedly providing Cuba with warnings of U.S. military plans. In the social networks, there have been many expressions of gratitude for this selfless attitude. Upon her release from prison, she warned in a message that she, as a person, was irrelevant and that she would not participate in any media activity, asking instead that the focus be placed on Cuba, the serious problems of Puerto Rico and the environment.
From Miami, we have welcomed with great delight the release of Ana Belén Montes for her contributions to Cuba, to her people, and also to other peoples of the world. As always, here are trying to dismiss the revolutionary work of this great heroic woman who has been in jail for more than 20 years, and the first thing she has done after arriving in Puerto Rico is to ask the United States to remove the blockade of Cuba and to have normal relations with the island.
For 17 years, Ana Belén Montes, a former senior analyst for the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency, provided allegedly secret information to the Cuban government. She was sentenced to 25 years in prison for conspiracy to commit espionage. Before the court, she said she believed that the whole world is one country, confessed that she obeyed her conscience more than the law, and so she felt morally obliged to help Cuba defend itself protest against U.S. efforts to force its value and political system on it.
Anna, during all these years, has become a great reference for all of us. A reference for peace, for friendship among peoples, for respect, for human dignity. If the world were a different world, Anna should have received medals instead of those 22 years of unjust prison in terrible conditions of detention. However, coming from the United States, nothing surprises.
The Queen of Cuba, as Ana Belén was nicknamed in U.S. military intelligence for her knowledge of the island, was locked up in the Center for People with Mental Problems and subjected to an extreme isolation regime. She could not interact with any detainee, nor talk on the phone, nor receive newspapers, nor watch television. No one could ask about her health. The head of the diplomatic mission of Puerto Rico in Cuba tells TeleSUR that it's the right of Boricuas to have relations with the island and defend it.
A great victory to begin with. I think it means a lot to the solidarity between Puerto Rico and Cuba, and Belén represents that, what a Boricua has done to support and defend Cuba. That is where the main happiness is, that she comes out the same way she came in, the same way we see. Less than 24 hours after leaving, she keeps the same expressions as when she came in regarding Cuba, regarding the concern towards Puerto Rico and other things. I think that is where the value of the facts is, like the fulfilled duty.
There are many who feel respect and admiration for this woman who never received money from Cuba and only acted out of ethics and a sense of justice. Fidel Castro was one of them. He responded to a question from a U.S. journalist, Andrea Michel. He referred to Ana Belén in December 2002.
A noble and good American person who is against an injustice, against a blockade of more than 40 years, against all the terrorist acts that were committed against Cuba, and is capable of reacting in this way, is an exceptional person. She's a person who, given this attitude and not simply out of gratitude, but out of sense of justice, deserves respect and admiration.
Ana Belén said before hearing her sentence that her greatest wish was to see the beginning of a friendly relationship between Cuba and the United States.
Fabiola López, TeleSUR, La Habana.
Now we move on to other topics. On Wednesday, a strike of nurses at two major New York City hospitals carried on for a third day as the labor union representing thousands of employees tried to work out a deal to increase wages and staffing levels. The nurses, represented by the New York State Nurses Association, walked out early on Monday after negotiations with management ran aground at Mount Sinai Hospital in Manhattan and Montefiore. The union has stressed staffing levels as a key concern, saying that nurses who labored through the grueling peak of the coronavirus pandemic are stretched far too thin because too many jobs are open. Nurses say they have had to work overtime, handle twice as many patients as they should, and skip meals and even bathroom breaks.
And when do we want it? Now. We have been here every few months fighting about this same issue, calling on the executives in Monty to hear us when we are begging them to recognize the indignity that comes with asking a nurse to work 24-hour shifts, to recognize the indignity that they are making patients suffer by having hallway patients.
And France's 8 main worker unions announced a national day of strikes after Prime Minister Elisabeth Borne unveiled a contentious pension overhaul aimed at raising the retirement age from 62 to 64 by the year 2030. At a news conference in Paris, Borne said that the minimum retirement age to be entitled to a full pension will be gradually increased by 3 months every year, a change in line with a long-standing pledge by President Emmanuel Macron. In addition, people will need to have worked for at least 43 years to get a full pension starting from 2027. Angered with this proposal, the unions called for workers to strike on January 19th. According to Cyril Charbonnier, president of the French Confederation of Christian Workers, in order to bend the government's will, workers must be united and have a very strong and fast mobilization.
Following the announcement of the governmental reform, all the trade unions immediately met to build a common response of interprofessional mobilization. This will take the form of a first day of strikes and demonstrations on January the 19th, 2023. Today we have an important reform that affects all French people, that is very unfair, that is not necessary. We know that in order to make the government bend, which is very determined, we must be united. We must have a very strong and very fast mobilization. The best way to be strong, fast, and to have a lot of people in the streets is to have the 8 trade union organizations calling on the same slogan. So the success depends on our unity. We made this unity. Now we hope that the people will follow and that we will be extremely numerous in the streets on the 19th.
And we have more news coming up after a final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back. The United States government extended the public health emergency for the spread of a more transmissible subvariant of Omicron. According to reports from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, the HHS, the COVID-19 variant called XBB.1.5 or Kraken, which accounts for more than 70% of the cases in the Northeast and about 28% nationwide, is the most transmissible subvariant that has been detected so far. However, it is yet to be determined whether it causes a more serious disease than the previous ones. In this context, authorities urge the population to be vaccinated with updated doses to protect themselves against the new strain of Omicron. And after 42 days without cases of Ebola reported in Uganda, the World Health Organization announces that the country is now Ebola-free.
Honorable Minister, to take this duty of confirming that the Ebola outbreak is over in Uganda. Uganda has proved it again. Even the most dangerous virus can be contained because of the dedicated health workers, the committed community, a transparent leadership which was able to support this response.
And we have come to the end of this news brief. But remember, you can find this and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also, if you feel so inclined, please join us on social media for all the latest news. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Telegram, and TikTok. For TeleSUR English, I'm your anchor, Gladys Quesada. Thank you for watching.